Welcome to episode 42 of Upshift, No Direction Network podcast that gives you an edge on Essence20. I'm Ryan Costello.
I'm Charles Cushman.
Remember, I'm not doing the long preamble anymore.
All right.
That's all right. But one preamble I do have to get into is that before we begin, although I have worked for Renegade on Essence20, Upshift is not associated with or produced by Renegade Game Studios. This is not an official Essence20 podcast, and all opinions here shared herein are my own or my guests or my co-hosts are our own. Let's change. Boom. Are our own. So, Charles, a lot of role-playing game mechanics emphasize combat. My Little Pony role-playing game needed to resolve conflict in a wider variety of ways. So today we're going to be talking about what all Essence20 GMs can learn from the My Little Pony role-playing game's conflict chapter to enhance their campaigns. This chapter is like the secret weapon of the My Little Pony role-playing game core rulebook.
It really is. Again, I think that we'll probably have talked about this a couple of times before. At least you've talked about it a couple of times before. I was not sold on My Little Pony at first. But you kept kind of going in like, you got to look at the rules. You got to look at the rule book. Even if you don't like My Little Pony, this is the rule book for you because it just widens so much, both with the magic, which you talked about earlier, but also with using things like stress, essence, loss, and consequences, all of that, those additional pieces in there made it a totally different game. And so you got me. You got me to buy in.
We kind of touched on it last episode in that the more Essence20 core rulebooks Renegade published, the better Renegade got at core rulebooks. And so it didn't quite apply to G.I. Joe Power Rangers. As we said, they were both at the printer at the same time. But then Transformers came out and things were a little cleaner, a little more comprehensive. And then when My Little Pony came out, not only was it our now fourth chance to do an Essence20 core rulebook, but it was also one that asked us to find new ways to express conflict within a game other than just combat. Which isn't to say that we removed combat, only that we added more options.
And I gotta ask, why? Why did My Little Pony have to have non-combat resolutions or good ones?
So here's the thing about Friendship is Magic, the specific era of My Little Pony that this core rulebook is based on. Any given episode of the cartoon, you would put it on. If you just put on an episode at random, you would not really know what you were going to get. You could have a light, fun episode about everybody preparing for a ball. You could have Pinkie Pie having an existential crisis and dealing with clinical depression. Or you can have a giant monster that threatens all the lives of Equestria and our main characters, which includes a seamstress and somebody that is so shy that she has trouble just communicating with any people, having to fight this monster to save the world. And it really is unlike all of the other Essence20 settings. If you watch an episode and there's no there's no combat, that's weird. Whereas My Little Pony, you can have multiple episodes with no combat and then suddenly have a massive melee in the middle of the season.
So how then did you kind of get your heads around coming up with these broader resolution options, like these different things that you could do in the game that weren't combat?
Luckily, Essence20 was designed. Even though our first three core rulebooks, our first three settings were very action-adventure focused and very combat-heavy, it was designed that combat didn't have to be the main way that we resolve things. In fact, if you just look at an Essence20 character sheet, if you compare it to, say, a Dungeons & Dragons or a Pathfinder character sheet, regardless of edition, about 2/3 of the character sheet is dedicated to combat options for those games. Whereas with Essence20, most of the character sheet is that chunk about your skills. And while most of those skills can be applied in combat, most of them can also be applied outside of combat. And so our conflict resolution mechanic from the beginning could just handle any kind of combat. Basically, in the same way that a might roll could be a punch in the face, an alertness roll could be a punch into the shadows to see what's sneaking up on you. Like, it all works the same way. You can either think of everything as a punch or as everything as a key to unlock moving forward. So, one of the ways that the My Little Pony core rulebook was ready to go in this direction was because Essence20 was already geared to go in that direction, even though we hadn't explored it in this much detail in any of the previous core rulebooks.
And so I don't remember who was specifically responsible for these rules, but sort of what were they driving at and driving it in the direction of and doing in order to do this. If My Little Pony is just so way out there, it could be literally anything in the world coming up.
So I was responsible for the conflict rules. Although going into it, when we were planning what would go in each chapter, I came to one of the first meetings for planning the core rulebook and said, I think instead of the combat chapter, we should call it conflict, which is just a nice broader word and reflects the content better. And Trivia, who was one of the Renegade employees who was also on the book, they agreed right away. They were like, I had the exact same idea. And so right away we were on the same page about that. So I took this on as one of my one of the elements that I was working on. And my goals, as usual, is to bring to life what we see in the fiction. And so specifically, I liked the idea that an episode could be about a specific character. And even though the other characters have their own things going on, you know, the camera is following one particular character and we're getting a little more insight into them. And so I was like, is there a way that we can do that kind of camera focus, or having this group session where everyone is playing in the same episode, but it is an episode about one of the players. So that was one of the challenges for challenges. That was one of the goals, sorry, for the challenge mechanic. It was also just to have everything as exciting as combat. So a pie baking contest should be as exciting as fighting a bugbear. We just needed to make sure that, you know, the steps and the drama and the consequences of every role were still evident in there.
So I guess that brings up a good question as to what makes a good challenge. But before we jump to what's a good challenge, because you started to talk about those, there was a really good episode about puzzles earlier on Upshift. And so, how is a challenge different than a puzzle?
Okay, so a puzzle is a series of locks and keys. And there's breadth and there's depth, but ultimately you need to unlock the last lock, and you have to take a certain number of steps to find the key to the last lock, and usually involves finding smaller keys for smaller locks and building up to that last one. And it can have no narrative, really. It really is just like an escape room in that. Well, actually, escape rooms often have a lot of narrative, so that's not fair to escape rooms. But you can just be put into a room with, you need to get through this door, and that is the entirety of the story there. And the personal stakes can be low or high depending on how dangerous the room is, but it's still it's a lot more just character agnostic. Whereas a challenge shares a lot in common with puzzles, and that you are still working towards a goal, but there's a lot more flexibility in what the goal is. And so the GM can infuse a lot more story, they can make it a lot more personal, and they can just, spin more of a yarn as they are playing out a challenge.
Let's talk about what a good challenge is then. What makes a good challenge as opposed to just a story element or some part of the role playing?
Good challenge is something that's easy to invest in and never feels like a foregone conclusion, and the action never lulls. So if we're again going for that baking contest, we don't want someone to just, roll for tossing the dough and then knowing that if they fail, they'll get an infinite number of other chances to fix it. That there is either a timeline or there are consequences to every failure and success.
As far as rewarding these challenges or identifying kind of what the point of a challenge is, what do you recommend that GMs do, particularly in Essence 20, in order to be able to reward those type of things? And I guess it depends on the scope that you're talking about as well of the conflict.
Right. So these are all elements of the challenges. So we might as well kind of break down how it's presented in the My Little Pony core rulebook. So this is in chapters 10. Chapter 10 is the conflict chapter, and it is one part a combat chapter, which is similar stuff that we've seen in the other core rulebooks, although kind of scaled down. And then a much expanded idea on what you're doing between combats and other ways that you are exploring the worlds and the challenges ahead of you. So challenges operate on multiple different scales, but always have a goal. So there is always, ultimately, something is trying to be done. We are trying to bake the best pie, or we are trying to bake a pie in time because we've got someone coming to pick up that pie at a certain time. Pie is just like an easy example for people can feel the stress of having to get the pie right. And
I feel like you might have missed dinner.
No, actually, I overplated my dinner. So Tina had made a bunch of dumplings, and I put a whole bunch on, and then I had to put some back because I had too big of a lunch, and my eyes were bigger than my belly. No, I'm just always up for pie. So yeah, first thing you need to establish is what is the goal, and then second is the obstacle. So I just gave two examples. One of them is a time frame. So you have a time limit. You need to get a certain number of successes or succeed in a certain way or a certain difficulty level by a certain time. Another one is if it's a contest and there's another person making their best pie, then you are always trying to do the best possible because you don't even know the quality of their pie. You are just trying to out quality another pie, and it's a little more nebulous. Next up, we say rewards and consequences. So, what do the players gain from accomplishing this goal? What happens if they fail? This can be the end of the adventure, like the adventure that comes with the GM screen. I will bust it out here because I'm forgetting the name. In a Jam, that's right. So, the last encounter in a Jam, or the last scene, is a cider making contest. And so you are having to follow bizarre instructions in order to make your goal. And so, yeah, so it is all built up to this. Whereas, alternatively, it could be an element of a larger challenge. So, if you are going to that ball that we were talking about earlier and you need the perfect dress, scoring the perfect dress is the first step towards a later goal of then you have to present the dress, you have to go to the ball, you have to be the best at the ball. So, thinking of Cinderella, the dressmaking scene comes before the ball scene, and they both have separate goals, separate challenges, separate obstacles, but they are connected.
I
How
really
do you,
felt like the Cinderella dressmaking scene should have been played with the A team, like when they're putting this stuff together and nailing it together thing. I feel like that would have been really good as well. But
I need to see if that exists. And I also need to see an 18 montage do bippity boppity boop, put it together, and what you get? And like they're making I don't know, a jet plane out of some scrap metal.
I feel like that would totally work. Ah,
Um,
okay, keep going.
Participants. Participants is another element. So, is it team versus team? Is it team versus? Actually, a lot of the way I present this is just talking about the three classic conflicts in fiction, which are, character versus themselves, character versus their environment, character versus character. And so, challenges operate in the same way. Are you just trying to overcome a personal goal, a personal issue? Are you trying to compete against someone else? Are you working together to beat just something in front of you all? So that is participants, and then the scope is how big is this challenge, and this is where I had the most fun with it. Oh no, actually, sorry, it's a combination of participants and scope. When I was talking about how you can have a main character to a challenge, making a main character to an episode without them hogging the whole spotlight, it basically is that everyone's going on an adventure together. Somebody has this side plot, and as they are working towards one goal, they are working towards this separate personal goal, which is very much how a lot of these episodes work. Like it is an ensemble cast, but there are main characters to the episodes. And as long as the GM rotates and makes sure that everyone gets their chance to be the main character, then the fact that a little more spotlight is on one particular character doesn't change, or it's still balanced across the whole campaign. Like if you're running a one shot and you decide to make one character the main character, that's not great.
Well, and it does, I think, back to classic G.I. Joe cartoon episodes where it was around featuring one or two people and their particular skill sets, as opposed to like the power of the whole team. That was often covered as well, like maybe in bigger five-part ones, but they would focus on one or two because it was just an easier narrative to tell. So that kind of fits in with the setting as well.
A great example is actually in Transformers: The Golden Lagoon, which is a oh shoot, what's his name? The blue dune buggy. I'm gonna look it up.
Beachcomber?
Yes. So Beachcomber finds this blue lagoon in this beautiful untouched part of the world, and he finds out that the gold lagoon actually makes him blast proof. And so when he would get blasted by some Decepticons, he ends up completely unharmed, and they're like, how did he get that gold stuff? And then becomes a battle for this gold lagoon, which the Autobots repel the Decepticons and they save the day, and everyone cheers. But it wrecks this perfect environment that is what attracted Beachcomber to this area to begin with. And like the episode just ends with him kind of bummed, being like, yeah, we won. And that's an example of the session. The team has won, but a character had a personal challenge and failed because his personal challenge was to preserve nature. And unfortunately, through the separate skill test that he had to be making, somewhere along the lines, things just didn't work out for him.
So that brings me to sort of talking about physical, mental, and emotional challenges. That one would be an I would think the last one would be an emotional challenge. Him kind of losing something that was valuable to him in order to prevent other people from getting it and exploiting it, would be an emotional outcome. But can you talk to me a bit about physical, mental, and emotional as three different kind of categories?
Yes, so we introduced a new type of damage called stress, which plays on an existing mechanic, which is the essence score damage. And often when something like this comes up, it's because I'm looking at the rules and I'm saying, we've got this rules for this, like we've got this chunk of rules that I can understand when it would come up, but we have built no options around it. And so, if a game mechanic exists, but there's no ways of accessing it, does it really exist? Does it make a sound? So yeah, essence damage is something that exists in every version of Essence 20, every core rulebook, including consequences of being reduced to 0 of your essence score. But essence, like options that deliver essence damage is so rare, and your essence scores get pretty high pretty quickly, that it's almost pointless that this element of the game existed. Stress was one way of tapping into that part of the game that was being underserved, and it really worked well with what we were doing with challenges. So the idea of stress is that you are not taking physical harm, and I will just take a second to say there was an edit to my original draft that I strongly object to here. The original draft was that stress equals essence score damage of a certain type related to the challenge. That was it. It was nice. It was clean. Stress always equals essence score damage. For whatever reason in the edit, they said, or sometimes it's health damage. And it's like, no, this is the alternative to health damage. My advice is when you're reading this section, ignore any mention of health damage, because the whole thing reads unevenly, because it's always taking an elegant, simple concept and saying, but by the way, if you want to do health damage, almost like they were trying to make it easier for you by adding exceptions and complicating and messing up the whole thing. So I will shout out to my editors that often, even usually, they take my words and make them better. But every now and then I see something like this and it's just like you have kinked up something that was smooth and fancy, and I don't know why. So anyway, that's out of the way. Stress should never equal health damage. That is a separate thing. Stress should always equal anything but health damage. And so if you are doing something physical, like the example that's given is that Applejack needs to harvest a bunch of apples in a short amount of time. This is something that we've actually seen in the show. Like sometimes instead of asking for help, she'll just do the entire acre by herself, and she will clearly get stressed about it, and it will wear her down physically and mentally. And so it's up to then the GM and the player to assess what you're doing and how it can be stressful if you're failing. And so she is taking physical stress because she is just doing this physical labor over and over again. And if it's constantly a might skill to kick the apples out of the tree, which is how it's done, how it's shown to be done on the show, then she would slowly take strength damage, because you cannot just constantly do this. Like narratively, it makes sense, and it makes logical sense in the real world, which I think is a sign of a good mechanic, that if you are taking stress, it is for reasons that we as people can take stress. So yeah, if you push yourself too hard, socially or physically or mentally in some other way, you take stress, and that could eventually lead to you becoming more vulnerable. So if you take too much strength stress damage, your toughness goes down. And if then a fight breaks out, here you are exhausted from all of this stress. You haven't taken physical damage, but you are much more vulnerable to physical damage. Likewise, there are a lot of social situations on My Little Pony where it's just like, I don't want to tell my friend how I really feel because I'm worried about them feeling bad. And so internalizing and trying to deftly avoid using the truth, it causes social stress, and it so would reduce the social score the more that you fail to, just be honest with your friend. Mental stress is also similar in that, like, if Twilight is just pushing herself too hard in the library, researching a spell, or just convinced that some solution to some problem exists out there, and so she hits the books, the longer that she spends in the library, the more of these skill tests she would have to make, with the consequence being that she is mentally exhausting herself. So that would be stress to smarts. And speed is similar to strength. So like if Rainbow Dash is flying too long, or if somebody is doing too many gymnastics, pick any skill. If you do too much of that, you are exhausting yourself physically, just in the speed. You'll just get like gummy limbs and stuff. So you'll probably never reach the point of being paralyzed or comatose, like these severe consequences, these types of defeat that you get from being reduced to 0 essence score. But still, the idea that you have pushed yourself too much is affecting your ability to accomplish anything. And that's why the idea of running a challenge parallel to the plot is interesting, because of the consequences you are then seeing. Oh, I was supposed to be doing this, and I'm going to make my side skill test. I have failed, and now I am worse at the main plot that we are all working towards.
Let's say I'm a GM and I want to do a tree kicking side quest. How do I determine what a fair way is to say how many trees to kick before someone takes essence damage? Like, what are the kind of guidelines that you would have to try and make that feel fair?
You're basically talking about balancing a challenge, and I do
Yeah.
believe there is some advice in here.
Page 167, I think.
So that is friendly or hostile, external or internal, short or long. So we've kind of been touching on all of those topics. Simple or complicated, so that is going back to the puzzle, basically, the number of times you have to pass at one thing to move on to the next thing. So simple has fewer challenges, and then more complicated has more challenges. They represent more things. Physical, mental, and emotional. Oh, there we go. Setting the challenge difficulties. That's what we were talking about. So game masters should use the same guidelines for determining the difficulty of tasks in a challenge laid out in Chapter 6. So yeah, it's the same idea that you can have many lower difficulty challenges, and that is that is difficult in one way, versus fewer higher difficulty, like mixing up a little bit of many easier and fewer more difficult, just sets the pace that you were looking for. You'll also just want to set this based on the narration, the story that you're trying to tell, the logic to the situation. Generally, you will want to mix them up for variety's sake, and ultimately end with a couple of higher, like wider, higher will always be the most difficult, and so that is a good way to reach your peak drama when you're coming to the end of a challenge.
So, as you're a designer, but you're also a GM and a player. How do you think it's a good way to start expressing that they're feeling that stress? Like, how would you describe to a player that the impact that the stress is having on them? I know it's not, it's like, well, you take speed damage. In order to be able to keep that narrative going, how would you express or explain speed damage?
In the same way I explain any kind of damage, I will usually contextualize it. You start with, like, whether we're talking about combat or sort of damage or stress, you still say, this is what's happened to your character, then tell them the mechanical consequence, and then give them a chance to react and maybe add to the narrative of, like, oh, that's really dragging me down. And usually the response you get from a player tells you how they want to communicate this. So if a player is just like, oh, I just took 2 strength damage, I'm down to 2 strength damage, I can't do that again. Whereas if they are a little more abstract and a little more psychological about it, and just being like, all right, my arms are tired, I'm breathing heavy, but I've got to keep going towards this, even though I am worried about, stressing myself out further like that, then that's like, okay, these people are emphasizing the character side of it, and so you reciprocate as the GM. You give them what they are most engaged with, and you can usually average that out around the table so that when you are giving the player what they came here for, it doesn't matter that somebody else might be more mechanical or more narrative. Everyone is getting what they want, and as hopefully you as the GM are as well.
I love that. That really nice. It is. There is no one size fits all answer for that, and I think that it kind of does get into player dynamics quite a bit to say how you communicate these sort of things. Um, when we look at stress, what does this let the players do that they wouldn't normally be able to? Because usually every one of these things has an upside and a downside. What does stress allow a player to do that they might not be able to do if it didn't exist?
You can feel what you're going through a little more granularly. So this is a low health system. Taking 1 damage is a huge hit, and you go from, like, you can measure it in percentage just by eyeballing it, because odds are you will have less than 5 health, and so, like, If you're 5 health and you lose 1 health, you have lost 20% of your health. And yet it has not at all affected your ability to continue. Like you can be down to 1 health and you are acting exactly the same as if you're at full. Whereas with stress, every little hit is knocking you down a little bit more. We decided not to have it penalize your skills because that gets too nitty gritty, and we wanted
Mhm.
that to it would slow things down. It would make it too mechanically focused. But like a GM could always say, like you've taken half your essence score in stress, you're suffering a snag on any skill test related to that essence going forward. Um, but anyway, but just seeing your defense go down, and then if you're in a situation where you would normally be defending with that defense, like defenses are obviously paired. You've got toughness and evasion. Basically, when you hit a situation that's physically harming you, you could choose one of the two, and you will always choose the higher of the two, except for very corner situations where you are either denied or there is a greater consequence to using a certain type of defense. Like if you try and tough out fire, you take more damage than if you try to evade it. No, I think I got that backwards. It's acid. If you try and tough out, you take more damage. So yeah, so like normally you'll always defend with your better defense. And so once you notice that, oh, my good defense is now lower than my secondary defense, and you start leaning into your other one. So we'll just say you're usually toughness and now you're leaning into evasion. Psychologically, that means something because now how you picture your character taking these blows, instead of just like bracing for a hit, you're now trying to avoid it. It all comes down to numbers, and yet the beauty of the role playing game is that numbers create images and they create stories. And so seeing how the stress is slowly affecting your character and forcing you to play them slightly differently, even if it's as simple as saying, I now evade instead of use toughness, all of these little changes have grander ramifications.
That's great. Like that is, and I think that's actually one of the beautiful things about this system that I don't necessarily get out of fifth edition D&D, or I don't typically get out of other ones. There was one that I was playing. I GM'd a game called Starport, which is all it's for kids, and so it's all nonviolent conflict resolution. But the challenge is that there weren't really the mechanics to support it. They really didn't give you a fair way of resolving those things. And I think that this fairly simply sets out a way to mechanically resolve all of those things which cannot be necessarily felt like a sword hitting you in the face,
Yeah.
right? So I think that's put together. So my question again is, give me another example of this in my own terms, because we've talked a lot about ponies. In G.I. Joe, what's a good example of how this kind of thing could play out?
Uh, well, let's say barbecue. Barbecue is the firefighter on the GI Joe team, and if he has to fight a fire, the deeper you go into a burning building, the more you have to make brawn tests to just physically push yourself through the debris that has fallen down. The more you have to make might tests to hack at things with your axe, and the more that the fire might make attacks against you, and that could not necessarily do damage because you're in your protective armor and whatnot, but you can easily have the fire make an attack against you, and on success increases your stress because you are just feeling more and more pressure of the situation you're in. And of course, the deeper you're into a burning building, the farther you are from the entrance that you went in, so your exit gets further away. And so you can also make an alertness skill test to try and navigate the fire because landmarks are changed. You are surrounded by similar colors and similar elements. And so if you fail that alertness skill test, it can start to mentally affect you. And again, the fire, the situation, or the things that barbecue comes across can also then make attacks against you. And that can be another way to increase the stress. So that's both a physical and mental challenge. And, suppose he gets out and he has saved everybody, and then Cobra attacks. This guy is exhausted. He is wiped out. And now he's supposed to fight even a viper, let alone a bat or like a crimson guard. So now you see how like the stress that he's under plays out and like has further consequences in the rest of the adventure.
And I really think that that's very much superior to, okay, roll a survival check. I mean, you're in a place where you've just created this wonderful, dramatic, and supported narrative about fighting a fire. which again, that's not a physical combat. That is something that has all of these interesting dimensions on them. I think it can probably be applied to physical combat as well. I don't think it has to be one or the other. It makes me want, if you saw the Daredevil, the original Daredevil TV show where he's fighting his way down the hallway and they do it all as this one big take. And by the end of it, he just nearly falls down exhausted. He's taken physical damage, but really what's killed him isn't the hits he took. It was just, the whole exhaustion of filling that out, fighting every single one of them down the way to the end. And that felt very real to me in the same way that the explanation that you just gave me of firefighting felt real to me as well.
That is a great example. I love those scenes because usually like about halfway through you'll be really be feeling the physical, and then he'll just throw a major punch or he'll do like some backflip that he just has to do. It's like, okay, he pulled a little through, and then he sinks again, and you just see like, oh, he passed that skill test. But just every skill test he's making is putting a little more pressure. He's won every fight in this hallway, and yet each fight is taking its toll on him. This is something that even when I was first getting into Dungeons and Dragons, as a teenager in high school, I was like, it's weird that you've just got this soup of health and you're fine until you run out of soup. And then, what are you going to do? How am I going to get more soup? And at the time, I did not have the design chops to know how to make, the loss of hit points have a little more dynamics. Fourth edition did it very well on the GMing side, or the DMing side. They had bloodied was a condition that if a creature or a target reached half their hit points, they became bloodied, and that would sometimes activate things. You can either gain like a fight or flight response and get better in combat because you're lower down, or you just start taking like too many hits, and so bloodied is the barrier. That is the closest to a comparable mechanic that I've come across, in that you can feel the small consequences of what you've been going through.
So the reason, of course, why I bugged you to do this one is we just recently in our GI Joe role-playing game that Eric runs, he did an entire session where it was about intelligence gathering under a flag of truce, and so you had to go back and forth, and we were doing essence damage to try and drive other people out of the room or get something from them that they didn't give to you. And I thought that was a really cool idea as opposed to combat. But after hearing you talk about this, I'm wondering whether or not it's a part of combat, that this stress should be something that's applied to everything, including combat, because there is obviously more than just, getting shot for a point of damage that happens in a combat. And so stress might be something that needs to be more regularly used everywhere.
Sure. Like if you think of like a Looney Tunes cartoon, I don't even know if this is a real one or if I'm just creating it, but like a dog has to bring his master's potted plant back to the apartment, and then he gets in a fight with another neighborhood dog, and you just see him punching while holding up the plant and doing all kinds of things because the plant is his highest priority, but the combat is the secondary priority. And that's the same thing. Anything that is causing you stress beyond just the fact that you were in a fight, even a life or death fight, it adds dynamics. It makes it a more engaging and interesting combat, or any scene, really.
So when I started playing Essence 20, I realized, okay, it's based on cartoons. It's probably not going to have a lot of depth, but as I keep digging into it, there are bigger pieces here that can be applied that give you a deeper role-playing experience than I was expecting. And I think that without the context of My Little Pony's bizarre, it's this, then it's this, then it's this, then it's that, would you have gotten there?
So maybe, because this was partially created for the My Little Pony core rulebook, but also partially created when I was writing the Sergeant Slaughter core rulebook. The exact timeline is a little blurry. I know I was writing the core rulebook for My Little Pony at the same time I was writing Cobra Codex, and at some point, yeah, I think I came up with the stress mechanic for My Little Pony, and then when I was working on the Sergeant Slaughter box set in the adventure at one point, I was like, I really want to set it up to Slaughterhouse at some point, because the Slaughterhouse, I found out, even though it's just this background element of the movie for one scene, a lot of thought was put into the design and the layout of it. And so this being a Sergeant Slaughter book, I wanted to finally say, like, let's fulfill the potential of the Slaughterhouse. And so I decided we would have an obstacle course there. And the obstacle course is either, roll to jump over this wall. Okay, you've successfully jumped over the wall. or you haven't. And if those are the only consequences, like obviously the adventure is not going to stop because you screwed up the obstacle course. But then if the jumping over the wall is pointless, why am I making you do it? And so especially the more I worked on published adventures, the more I realized the techniques I was using in my improvised games and how I was always making sure that there was consequences to every action. And because a published game, I can't have, an infinite number of reactions to what the players are doing. It has to be in print. And so stress was a good shortcut to say, like, you jump over the wall. Oh, you failed. Well, you make it over the wall, but now you nicked your ankle on the way down, so you're a little bit slower. Take a speed stress. And the deeper you go into the obstacle course, the more you feel the pain of what you've gone through previously. So yeah, if it hadn't been for My Little Pony, there we go. The first time that I used stress in published adventure was in G.I. Joe and Sergeant Slaughter specifically, even though it was designed for My Little Pony. So it does ultimately come down to there should always be consequences to everything, and stress is a great way of just throwing a little bit of consequences when it's not big enough that it's either life or death.
That really felt like an until all are one moment. Um, but no, I can definitely see it. I have a better, just from this conversation, really have a better understanding of what it is and how it plays into how you interact with this universe and how you interact with the challenges in the universe. We're just about out of time. I want to maybe give you a chance to do some shout outs.
Sure. Yeah,
I know
absolutely.
that
I've got some
Renegade
shout outs
Con's
too.
coming up. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, well, of course, Renegade Con is June 6th. That is the Friday after this episode releases. And so the following episode, we are definitely going to be talking about all the things that happen at Renegade Con. And just to cover a couple of things that I've seen online, Renegade Con used to be very Essence20 heavy. And it has become less and less Essence20 focused as HeroScape has taken more of the spotlight and as Essence20 has grown as a game. And so there's less need for the constant source books. Even the biggest fans of Essence20 are on the Renegade servers saying, boy, that's another hit to the wallet. So everyone is acknowledging that if we continue Essence20 at the same pace, you run out of space, you run out of money, and you don't need infinite new options. And so Essence20 has stuff in the pipeline, but we are slowing it down, and we're not going to advertise something that's coming out next year. We're going to advertise something coming out in a few months, which is why just overall the news cycle related to Essence20 has slowed down. But I saw someone on Facebook say, well, that's it. They must be losing the license because there's nothing Essence20 specific on the Renegade Con calendar. And then Jordan, who handles a lot of the social media, he's not on the social media team. He oversees the social media team. He stepped in right away and said, there will be a G.I. Joe sourcebook announced at Renegade Con. And so, again, it'll only be like a 5-minute segment, but people know officially there will be something announced at Renegade Con. So check it out. It will probably be at that second panel where they're introducing new things, or it might be in that weird post-credit seminar that they've advertised and given no details about. So that is, I always encourage people to check out Renegade Cons, but it feels like every Renegade Con I've got to give more and more of a disclaimer that there might not be much Essence20 news. So I'm happy to say that this time there is definitely some G.I. Joe RPG news. I know what it is. I'm excited for this information to get out there.
I don't, so I'm excited to actually to go to this one and to go online and see this one. Anything else interesting you want to drop for us?
Yes. So Renegade surprised me this week. So normally, if you pre-order Essence20 Sourcebook, you get the PDF for free, and usually it's ahead of time. That's not part of the guarantee, but usually it's ahead of time, and almost always it's 2 weeks before the physical release of the book. This week, out of nowhere, it was announced that the Transformers 1 sourcebook, which isn't out until September, anyone that pre-ordered can get their copy now. So the PDF of the sourcebook based on the Transformers 1 movie is out. It's in people's hands. And if you still have until September to pre-order, and if you put your pre-order in anytime ahead of time, you will get the sourcebook PDF for free as part of the deal. And so, so if you have pre-ordered Transformers 1, go check your Renegade account because you've got a free PDF waiting for you. If you haven't, but you're thinking about it, you can go onto the Renegade Discord to see what people are saying. People are loving this book, which I'm super happy about. This is the first Transformers book I've worked on since the core rulebook. And I got to do a lot of stuff that I've been holding on to and seeing that the Transformers side of the game could use. And a lot of people are reacting very positively to some of the things I've included. So a lot of reasons that I'm happy that Transformers 1 is out there. And again, if you've already planned on getting this, now's the perfect time to get it, because you already get it. You get the book as of when you place that pre-order.
That is awesome. So I'm going to throw a shout out as well. I mentioned our game and the Energon Protocols, which is run by Eric, our GM. I knew there were two letters there that I meant to say. But so if you go on YouTube and find at g.i.joe_headcast, you can come and see Ryan and I playing G.I. Joes. And our episode 6 just dropped. And I'm looking forward to hearing it because I don't remember which one that was. Oh, wait, no, I do remember that. There's the debut of the new team.
Oh, is that what that was? Oh,
yeah.
People can see Shoehorn.
So, yeah, who is really good. Well, it all comes around in a circle here till all are one. The My Little Pony rules were used to create Shoehorn.
So, our podcast isn't the only one that is on the Renegade, or sorry, the Headcast channel. Aaron Head, who is Headcast is named after, also has just a general G.I. Joe podcast. I'm looking for the name of it. I can't find it. But I'm recording episode 64. In episode 64, we are going to be looking at issue 64 of the Marvel Comics and the Cold Slither episode of the animated series. And so episode 64 is technically the first appearance of Backstop, even though it's not his cover appearance where he's actually a major player in it. But I am looking forward to talking about how little Backstop gets in this book in his main appearance. And Cold Slither, I am very excited to be talking about. That is one of my favorite episodes. It is a classic for a reason.
I love that. And so 5/25/25 at 4 p.m., which I believe is California time, the live stream for that is playing. And it's, again, if you go to the at G.I. Joe, so g.i.joe_headcast, you can find that as well. It's all on the same page.
I missed that this was live streamed. I'm glad that you caught that. So, wait a second. Oh no, that means I'm live streaming it this Sunday. This episode's not coming out until next Friday. So
correct.
People will not be seeing it, but I'll make sure to plug it online now that I know it's a stream.
And you have to do your hair.
Yes. That's just how podcasts are. Man, I get so red in the face lately when I'm doing these, and I'm just noticing. I don't know if it's my lighting or if I really am just that flush.
You need one of those puffs of, powder or something like that.
Yes.
Somebody run up and go, poof, so you don't look shiny.
Thank you for joining us for episode 42 of Upshift. I'm kind of upset that I didn't do something related to Destiny, as is the tradition with the 42nd episode of podcasts on our network. But I don't really know what I would have done, and we've done this gimmick a couple of times now, so just know that I'm very happy with the subject that we talked about today. So anyway, if you want to listen to other great gaming podcasts, you can go to nodirectionpodcast.com. In addition to this podcast, as far as Essence20 content comes out, I've got my Essential Builds blog. In the last two episodes, or the last two installments of that blog, I built Darth Vader and then Luke Skywalker as Essence20 characters, which of course meant that I had to tap into a lot of My Little Pony rules for the magic to recreate their force powers, and also Power Rangers for the grid powers. And yeah, it really made me wish that we had the Star Wars license for Essence20, because the things I could do for that, and just the powers that I want to design but have no reason to, because we don't have the Star Wars license or anything even close to the Star Wars license, and I cannot just throw force powers into My Little Pony without some valid reason. So anyway, this is the closest you will get to Star Wars and Essence20, and you can just see how it is an amazing system for building characters like Force users. I also want to say thank you to our patrons. If you want to help support the network, keep our lights on, you can go to patreon.com/nodirection. And of course, thank you to Word Burglar for the use of Letters from Snake Eyes Part 4, our theme song. You can find out more at wordburglar.com. He's actually got a new, I don't know if it's an album or a new single coming out called Rhymes with Comics. And as soon as that is officially out, I'll make sure to plug that again on the podcast. So until next time, I'm Ryan Costello.
And I'm Charles Cushman.
This has been Upshift.